So welcome. This is Optimal Territory Planning with Tableau. Just to make sure that we're all in the right spot. Yeah. So who are we? Oops. So I'm Hunter Barcelo. I'm a senior sales operations analyst at Tableau. I've been at Tableau for a little over 3 years. And this is?
Hi guys, I'm Justin Kruger. I'm a manager on the sales operations team. Been at Tableau for just under 5 years now. And some of my hobbies, I just like to drink beer. Anything with wheels, whether it's 4 or 2, I like to ride it or drive it. And yeah, love data and analytics. So if you guys have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out and hopefully to give you guys some tools and tricks and some information that you can put to play in your organizations after this. So.
Yeah, we want to make this interactive session as much as we can. We've got a fair amount of people here, so but we still want to kind of keep it conversational, and we're going to be available after the session if you have any other questions or anything that you'd like to follow up on. So I said it was going to be an interactive session, so now we're going to do a little show of hands exercise as well as part of our interactivity. So who here, raise your hand if you are in sales or part of a sales organization. Wow, all right. Raise your hand if you're distinctively in sales operations. Wow, all right. Great, we've hit our target audience like really well. So how many of you are in like a management type of role within sales ops? Oh wow, okay. It's about half the people. What about an analyst role? Okay, looks like about the other half. Awesome. So I think we're gonna hopefully have a little bit of something for everybody here. So just kind of a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about and what we're going to be covering today. So first, obviously, why would you want to use Tableau for territory planning, right? There's a whole number of reasons why. We're going to go over some of the big ones. We're going to talk about general best practices for your territory planning and design. Because even if you have the best technical tools and really good metrics, if you don't have a strong, robust process around building your territories and rolling them out, it doesn't matter how good your tools are, right? You got to have both. We're going to talk a little bit about choosing your metrics, what numbers you might want to use to determine the effectiveness of your sales territories in the coming years. We're going to give you a few different ideas depending on maybe your industry and your sales model, right? This is going to be something that's a little bit custom fitted to your company, but maybe some kind of starter ideas. And then lastly, we're going to demo. So we're going to take you through how we do this from start to finish. We take your accounts, we aggregate them up, we value them, we make territories, we deploy them out in a dashboard. Right. So in the end of it, we're going to end up with a dashboard that looks a little bit like this. Looks like we got stretched out a little bit due to resolution, but we're going to show how you can have a composite territory view, you can have a more granular territory view, and you can track the balance of your territory, and you can make all of this dynamic with your parameters. So why would you want to use Tableau for sales territory planning? Right, there's a lot of sales territory planning tools out there that are very specialized for territory planning. So why would you want to use Tableau? Well, first of all, most of them out there are really expensive. We've tried some of them. Our experience with them has been that not only are they very expensive, but they're also very bad, which is a really bad combination, right? And a lot of the times in most organizations, you're in a seasonal planning cycle, and so they're sitting on the shelf for 8-9 months of the year, and you're not getting any value out of them at all during those time periods. Tableau is something you can use year-round. You can use it for your operational dashboards, your quota dashboards, and you can use it for this territory planning process as well. So not only that, when we sunsetted our prior territory alignment software, our territory creation speed was cut more than half. We reduced our average time to create territories within a district by about 65–70%. We've also found that using this process creates better and more constructive dialogue with our sales leadership. Right? In this prior paradigm where we're using a specialized piece of software, and maybe we've got one person licensed to use it, they have to sit down right at their desk with the sales leadership. They can't ship it off to the sales leadership. They've got to spend a bunch of time to dump it out of that software, stage it somewhere else. In Tableau, we can take a laptop to a meeting room, we can send it to a sales leader, we can put it on a dashboard, we can have a conversation about that one-on-one anywhere where we have access to any PC, right? And not only that, but if you have sales leadership who are pretty tech savvy and are familiar with Tableau, we'll send them maybe our version of sales territory and with the metrics that we're using to balance it, and they may mark it up and they send it back to us, right? That's not something that you can do in some of these other pieces of software. Right. And lastly, happier people, right? People did not enjoy using the stuff that we had before. Tableau, it's a much better user experience. It crashes less. It's less buggy. The first thing when someone was training me on the software we had when I first came was save all the time. Basically never stop saving after every step because you never know what's going to happen. That's less of a concern with Tableau. And not just that, but it's one less piece of software that people on your team have to learn to use. Now Justin's going to talk us through some best practices.
Thanks, Hunter. So yeah, I'll make sure to try to keep you guys awake on this one. It's a little bit more of the methodology and kind of how we've deployed around the planning process, and I'm hoping to give you guys a little bit of a blueprint that you can take back and apply to your organization. Nothing's going to fit exactly into the timescales. This is kind of just best practices of what we offer and what we say you should do. So jump into it a little bit. So some keys to your success. The first one that we're really going to spend some more time after this is defining a timeline. It sounds very simple, very easy. Put in Excel, write it out, do the timeline thing. But it is crucial to knowing when you're going to hit your milestones. If you miss a milestone, what does that mean? How do you get back there? And then applying that across your methodology. The second is engage stakeholders. What we found prior with our process is that sales leadership team thought that it was more of a black box. We're just coming back, here's your territories, that's it. You get your territories and you have to go and execute. We have now got to a stage where we have regional sales ops. Hunter and I are on the global sales operations team at Tableau. But we've been able to enable our regional sales ops to actually have these conversations. Our director of the U.S. commercial team was able to sit down yesterday and he's like, look at all these ideas I have for next year's territory. So getting engaged stakeholders early and often is big. And also them using the software, trusting the software, and being a part of the black box or the process that happens behind the scene. One of my favorite things about why I joined sales operations is it's really, there's a lot of studies around the segmentation, the methodology that goes into how salespeople get the territories. When it's small, it's easy, it's fun, it's right, everyone knows who's working what accounts, but as you grow and scale your organization, these rules are ever more important. As we've gone up to the number of salespeople we are today, being here for 5 years, if we didn't have these rules and segmentations, we wouldn't have been able to get into the healthcare markets, get into verticalization, expand out our public sector teams, everything from domestic to international markets. Some of these are going to be a little rough at first, probably a lot of data cleanup and stewardship, but once you apply these over time, it helps just grow exponentially for how you scale outwards. Another one is a headcount plan. This is probably the toughest piece of the puzzle, is how to have that headcount plan, at least as you're going through this territory creation process. A lot of the stuff that we build around predicates off of having that headcount plan available, knowing that we're going to build territories that can go up and down with the headcount. Now, if you're saying you're going to have 5 people, then you go to 15 the next day, that's a big problem. But if you're going from 5 to 7 or 5 to 3 or 7 to 10, those are doable with the methodologies that we've put in place. And then last that Hunter's going to dive into as we get ready for the demo is really defining clear definitions around our metrics. What is a customer account? What is a hierarchy? What is the net new logos? What are the average spend over a course of period? How do you delineate between your different business units, whether it's first-time add-on purchases or renewals, depending on how your business model is, of course, right? But having those definitions written in stone is crucial for being able to scale out and work across teams. So what I want to jump into now a little bit is around the planning timeline. So I really break it down into 3 phases, or we at Tableau break it into 3 phases. Your go-to-market strategy, approximately about 2 months, but we'll dive into each of these as I go through the different bubbles. But in relative terms, this is really, it's the tops down, right? This is how do you get from where are you expecting to end this year to where you want to get next year. What's crucial that we found in this, and that's been beneficial as we've evolved our planning process, is that we've gotten other departments involved. We've got our marketing team involved, our dev team, our customer success, our deal desk, like all the organizations, at least just to be at a high level from their leadership and at theater levels to know like what are the high level targets, how are we working through the segmentations, what are we thinking about adding from a resource model. These are, I would suggest doing these in sequential order, but each step is a blueprint or document to go back to as you evolve your planning process. The second phase that I like to call is the territory or quota creation. That's really what we're going to dive in today is the territory construction in terms of the demo and how we use Tableau. We use Tableau for all of this, but just in terms of the technical side, the territories is probably the most challenging or use case that people have come back and asked us about. And then the final one is compensation plan and distribution. This is a crucial piece to the for sellers to know what is it that I'm going to get paid, how am I going to be motivated. So again, this is all just approximations on durations, but depending on your size and your scale, this is something just to anchor to and have sub-bullets and tasks around how to deploy this and get the to get something landed and on the road, like when the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So let's jump in really quickly. I'm going to go through just really quick. You guys are going to get these slides, so don't feel like you got to rush. And this is a little hard to read, but really how we kind of look at it is breaking it down from a global level to a regional level to a sub-region level. This is really where if you have a head of sales and then they have heads of EMEA, heads of APAC, and heads of Americas, you got to get those crucial leaders on board as it relates to the quota plans and who's going to take on, or what the quotas will look like, or the sales growth will be as you go through this planning process. Now, this is a tops down, right? This is hard, this is hypothetical, but this sets the blueprint as you start getting into the next sequential steps of, okay, we got to have X number of people in these roles, so to speak. So really important to at least have this early and identified early. Second is segmentation. So these three pillars that I put up here are kind of the main ones that I think from any business. You have your geographies, you have your vertical markets, and then you have your, we call it our core business, so really the enterprise versus commercial. It could be segmented by products. We've been lucky, or I don't know, lucky or not, but at Tableau we've had 3 real products that we've sold and tops of services and trainings, but as we expand out with prep and now the announcement today, we'll start becoming more product categorized, so we'll have to think about that as we transition. Then we get into your resource model. So these are kind of, I like to put the pyramid because the top tier is really your field sellers. And again, this is what we've used at Tableau, but this is something I feel a lot of organizations can apply across. You get to what are the number of field sellers and the strategic for namespace, and then you get into kind of the bigger groups of your commercial space. And again, right, these could be different. You could flip it upside down where you have a smaller inside team versus a bigger field team if that's what your sales model is, but this is just generally speaking a way to think about this and how you apply overlays for pre-sales and post-sales, customer success, your deal desk team, and so forth. And we'll get into this today, but territory construction, right? Like how do you actually get these territories? What do the territories look like? What is the balancing metric that says it's fair or not? The goal here that from our team, we have a sales planning team that does a lot of the headcount and the rostering, and we call it. But we work very closely with how do we actually create these territories that are equitable and fair for the salespeople to get into and sell to. Next is quota distribution. This is really where your bottoms-up plan starts to meet that tops-down plan. You'll identify areas that have maybe overexposure that in UK field enterprise team, 3 reps have 80% of the quota. Well, like sales leader in EMEA, we got to talk through like what are some of the risk mitigations we're going to do. But applying these rules or looking at this analysis from a bottoms up and knowing how these territories, it's a good indicator for leaders to start working together. Sellers to territories is pretty straightforward, but it's a big task. I mean, it's to go without saying, if you have a team of 100 sellers and you're creating 400 territories, getting those and working with the sales leaders to get that information is crucial as you get ready to reroute leads and counts and all that. So I'm going to pass it back to Hunter to go over some of the key metrics and data points.
All right. Thank you, Justin. So yeah, as part of this process, right, we're gonna need to figure out how we're gonna value our territories, right? How do we determine that one postal code is worth more than another postal code? In order to create equitable territories, we have to come up with some metric that we're actually trying to equalize. So really, this is a good opportunity to take a look at your business and identify what are your key measurable business drivers, your key measurable KPIs. Now, this is gonna vary a lot depending on your type of business, right? If you're, I used to work in freight and logistics. Freight and logistics is a much more predictable business in general, right? Everybody needs to get their thing from point A to point B. They may ship some different amounts of things quarter to quarter, but by the end of the year, assuming we've managed that relationship well, we're gonna be shipping roughly the same amount of items from point A to point B that we were last year, right? And software, it's a little bit of a less predictable business. Now it depends on if you're selling something that's more of a perpetual license, a subscription license. It depends on if you have a broad suite of product offerings, right? So you really kind of need to take a step back and understand what's really driving the growth in your business. Things that we have used and we've seen other people use, number of customers, transactions, customer spend, number of net new customers, new logos, product adoption, right? If you're a company like Microsoft where you sell like 30 some different products, just because someone has bought Office for every employee doesn't mean that they're done, right? There's so much more that you could offer them. How much you spend on renewal if you're a subscription-based company, lead flow is gonna be important for most lines of business as well, right? So really, it's not just enough to have these KPIs understood, but you really need to dive deep in and understand what effect they have on future sales, right? So at Tableau, what we do, and what I would really recommend you do as well, is we build training sets where we look at a point in time, right? In this example, we've chosen October 1st, 2017 is kind of our cutoff date in this training set. So we're looking at, in the 2 years prior to that, how many leads were generated in this postal code? What were the sales in this postal code? How many customers were in this postal code? And this is one of these where, as Justin talked about, having a clear definition of what is a customer is very important, right? You may be an organization where the same company has 8 different accounts in Salesforce, right? Is every single one of those accounts that has ever bought something a customer? Is the parent account a customer? There's no one right answer to this, but it's crucial that everyone is on the same page about what a customer means to your business, right? And then once we've built this data set, then we can look at, here's the sales we got in the next 12 months, and we can start really delving into the relationship between all of these elements and the sales that we got in that next 12 months, right? So if you want to get really advanced, you could be using some machine learning, AI type of technology to understand your key drivers. If you're just starting or you're a smaller business, you may want to just, examine it in Tableau. You just like, hey, we're gonna build a dashboard that's got every one of these metrics against our future sales, and we can look at the relationship that we see and see what really jumps out is having a really strong correlation with sales in the next year. Right. So now we're going to go through a little example use case for our demo. So I just want to set the scene in our kind of business scenario on the demo we're going to show. Right. So we need to plan territories for 3 account managers in 2019. We're working on an office supply company. We're using a data set that may be familiar to you. It's a variation on the global superstore, which if you've ever sat through a Tableau sales rep demo, you've probably seen global superstore or some variation of the superstore data set at some point in time, right? So we're an office supply company. We've got 3 account managers in 2019. And one thing that we do at Tableau that we've had a lot of success with is we actually cut multiple territories per sales rep. So if in this case, we've got 3 account managers, but we're actually going to create 9 territories. So each account manager is going to own 3 territories, and that gives us a lot of flexibility. If one of our account managers leaves, we can take his accounts and we can split them up. We can take those territories and split them up to the other 2 reps, right? So it's not an all or nothing thing where someone takes a whole territory and the other person feels really disadvantaged, right? Or in the event that we need to grow, right? And it's like, man, we can't even keep up with our business. Like, this has been the greatest office supplies year ever, and we need to add 2 more reps. We don't necessarily have to go just nuke everything and rebuild from scratch, right? We can peel off individual territories and assign them to our new people, right? So this gives us a lot of flexibility to maximize continuity as much as possible and minimize disruption while still being able to plan for growth or whatever could happen, right? Like when you're going for a whole year, a lot of stuff can happen in a year. Right. So we're going to skip over the in-depth analysis of our key metrics, but we're going to go ahead and say that we've gone in, we've taken our Uber analyst, they've gone in, in the back room, they've poured over the data, and they've told us that, the indicators of a future territory value are lifetime transactions in that postal code, the number of customers in that postal code, and how much customer spend we've seen in that postal code in the last 2 years. So because this is Global Superstore, we've got our sales information at the transaction level. For you following along on your Global Superstore sheet, this will be the orders tab of Global Superstore. And we're going to need to aggregate upwards to the customer postal code. All right. So how are we going to get from kind of point A to point B here? Right. So one of the things we're going to do in this process, and we're going to walk through it in prep in just a minute, is we're going to need to normalize or scale our measures, right? Because what we just went back and talked about, we're using employees, we're using transactions, and we're using lifetime spend, right? So these are all very different measures. So how do we add them up? How do we turn them into one number, right? Because trying to equalize based on 3 different metrics kind of on the fly is going to be a real challenge for us. So how do we make that happen, right? We normalize them. So we're going to put everything on the same scale. We're going to preserve that linear relationship, right? Because otherwise, let's say we got 2,000 employees plus $100,000 of sales. What does that give us? We don't know. This is like a bad high school math problem or middle school math problem, right? So scaling preserves the linear relationship. It's going to let us compare these measures more easily. Once we've aggregated it, we're going to divide by that maximum observed value, and we're going to multiply by whatever we want our maximum to be, right? We're basically creating kind of an abstract of those numbers. So say we've got the maximum we see in our Global Superstore set. For example, if it's 10,000 employees, and we've seen $1 million in sales as our maximum. In our prior example, we would take our $100,000 of sales, we'd divide it by $1 million, we'd multiply it by 1,000, so we get some nice round numbers, and no one's having to go down to like 12 digits of decimal precision. And we end up with what we call a sales index of 100. We do the same thing with employees. In this example, we'd get an employee index of 200, right? 2,000 employees divided by our 10,000 max in our data set, and we'd have 300 total index in that postal code. So right away we know, okay, well this postal code has got basically 10% the amount of sales of our best postal code, and we got about 20% of the employees of our best employee postal code. Right. So now that we've kind of set the stage for that, we're going to get into the demo. So in the interest of, no takeaways yet. All right. So I apologize because prep is not really designed as a presentation tool. It can be a little bit hard to see in the back row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch between this workflow and a screenshot that we can zoom in on a little bit to give you a better look at what's happening.
And again, we'll give you guys all this material afterwards, so you're going to have full access to everything.
Yeah, at the end I'm going to put up a link to a website where you can go download every file that we use in this entire demo and presentation. You'll be able to take it home with you today. So in here we've got our prep workflow. What we're doing is we're taking our orders tab from our Global Superstore set, which is this. It's got order ID, some order date, some customer information, and most importantly, it has got postal code information for some if you're in the US. Not everybody is in the US because we're on Global Superstore. So at Tableau, one of the things that we do is our territory team also owns new customers as well. So we want to make sure that we get every single postal code assigned, whether or not there's a customer in that postal code today. Because what if 2 months from now, a great lead comes up out of a postal code where we had no customers, right? In a scenario where we don't have that map, we don't have that pre-assigned, we've got conflict, right? We're going to have probably 2 people who are going to be fighting over that account if it's a good-looking account, right? So by pre-assigning ownership to every single postal code, we totally eliminate that issue. But that does mean that you need to have a comprehensive list of all the postal codes in the geography that you are looking to optimize. So if you're in the US, I have good news for you. We've included a list of every postal code in the US in the data that you can download. If you're not in the US, I'm sorry. For some geographies, it can be really hard to find that type of data. And for some geographies, postal codes have no geographic meaning. There's no real discrete boundary associated with the postal code. So if you're in one of those geographies, instead of postal code, imagine I'm saying like state or province or administrative unit or something that we can actually draw a line around. So in here, we've got our postal code sheet. We've got our orders sheet. We are taking our orders and we are filtering them just to the commercial and home office supply segment within the US. And then we've got a list of all of our postal codes in the US. So we're going to do a right join. The order looks a little bit funny, but we're actually doing an outer join so that we're preserving every single postal code. And then if it's got an order with it, we're going to associate the orders with all these postal codes as well. Right? And this is giving us a latitude and longitude for these postal codes, which is going to be important in a minute. And so we're also doing some calculations here to determine if that sale happened in the last 24 months. And we're doing a little bit of cleanup on the postal codes because some of them have the zip +4, some of them had a leading 0 that got dropped in our CRM system. So we've just got a couple little kind of touch-up calculations in here. And then we're using that aggregation function to group these postal codes and states together, right? So now we've taken what was this customer transaction data and we've grouped it all to the postal code. Now, if there weren't any accounts in there, we're just going to fill in a 0 for the sales, a 0 for the customers, a 0 for the lifetime transactions. So now we get into a little bit of prep trickiness. So we want to actually be able to use the maximum value in our data set so that we can divide our last 24-month sales over it, our customers number over it, et cetera. So we create just kind of a little placeholder value. You'll see this field here called join placeholder. And we're just calculating it as a 1, right? And so then we do another aggregation. And we just take, grouped by join placeholder, we take the maximum sales, the maximum lifetime transactions, and the maximum number of customers out of our data set. And then we're going to go ahead and join that maximum number back. And you'll see now for every postal code, we've got the maximum, which we can use to do our calculations, and we've got the actual information for that particular postal code. So we go through, we calculate the index, which like before is we take that postal code level number of customers, we divide it by the maximum on our data set, and then that's going to be our index. We add our indexes together in the next step. We do a little bit of field renaming in order to just clean it up, and we remove a bunch of fields that we don't want. So I'll just show you very quickly our calculated field here. So we're taking our 24 months sales index times 0.4. This is basically like a 40% weighting, right? Number of customers index times 0.3, number of transactions index times 0.3. And then we're going to output that to a CSV file. And so the reason why we're outputting this to a CSV file is if you're a small company or you're running a very small sales segment, we could group this to the state and it would be fine. It'd be super easy to do in Tableau, no problem. We'd have 50 states, we'd group them together, perfect, it'd be beautiful. Now, what happens when a state gets too big to really allocate effectively, right? If a state is big enough where you might need 2 or 3 sales reps to cover it at that point, how do we handle that? Right? What we don't want to be doing is we don't want to be grouping 42,000 postal codes manually in Tableau. Like, this is bad. We're back to unhappy analysts. We're back to we're back to like it takes us 4 times as long to create a territory. We don't want to do that. What's great is that same function that you've probably used in Tableau before to kind of group your states together and make these very nice objects based on your groupings. We can use that to help us shortcut that territory creation process. So once we've ran this workflow, what we can do, and we're using an R script. One of the things that made me really excited about the presentation this morning was when you guys have 2019.1, you can embed this right in Tableau prep. You won't have to open up R anymore. You'll just have it installed on your computer. You'll be done, right? For right now, for the next few months, we have to go through a slightly clunkier process, but soon we'll be able to just have this as a script node, and it will have it inline in that prep flow, and we'll be able to take it straight to Tableau Workbook after that. So what this script does is we're creating clusters or groupings of postal codes. So we go through, and within a state or a geographic unit of your choosing, right? You'll see I've got some comments embedded in here, and on the GitHub page where you can get this, there's going to be a little bit of additional information as well. But this needs a state, and what we use state for is this is a boundary or a geographic unit that we won't cross when we create our clusters. There's a postal code, which is our unique identifier. It says this is basically the unique ID. We give it a latitude and a longitude because we're going to create geographically relevant clusters of postal codes. And we need an index, and that's the value that we're going to use to make sure we don't make clusters that are way too big, right? So this is going to take a state where we don't have a lot of business that maybe had 800-900 postal codes, and we're going to maybe take it down to 2 or 3 clusters that we're going to allocate instead. So we'll go and we'll run this. And you can see this runs pretty quick. This isn't like a massive machine learning algorithm that's going to take 45 minutes to run. We're going to be done here in probably about 10 seconds. And we've got some nice little, you can watch the dots scroll past. Some people find it soothing. It's a matter of personal preference. All right, we've done. We've completed. We've made our clusters. So now, what we're going to do is when we load it up, we're going to end up with a screen. Looks like this. Everybody can see that okay. So we've got a cluster, a postal code, and a state in here. So I don't know if this may blow some small proportion of people's minds. I've never seen this before. This is one of my favorite Tableau features. We can go Geographic Roll, and we can create. So first I'll show you the data, actually. Let's back up one step. So you see we had state, we have postal, we have index, and we have a cluster field, right? And you'll notice that for Nebraska, it looks like we've made 2 clusters in Nebraska. But okay, so how do we actually make this information meaningful to Tableau? So if we right-click and choose a geographic role, and we say we want to create a geographic role from postal code. Now when I load this up, and it does take a little bit of time to do the very first time, but after that, once you've loaded it once in a session, it's very quick. And the reason why it's slow is it's actually doing a very large amount of geoprocessing in the background. And this is a super powerful feature that Justin and I spent a lot of time working with the dev team on because we spent about 2 years ago, as we were going down this feature development path, we sat down with the dev team and we walked them through a whole bunch of different territory creation scenarios and how we would want to present territories to people. And this is kind of one of the things that we came up with that we thought would be super valuable. Right, so we're going to take, just for visualization purposes, we're going to put index on here, and just so you guys can see a little better, you can see the clusters that we created. Right, so we've created sub-state units they're smaller than a state, they're bigger than a postal code, and they have a relevant amount of index for territory creation. Yes? You could do it at a global scale. You would need to get a little bit trickier in your prep workflow. So the script that creates these clusters doesn't actually care if your state's really a state or your province is a province or whatever. You could intermingle them as long as you had a latitude and longitude, basically just a center for each one of those. You could do that. So yeah, it's totally feasible. You could have, what we have in ours is the state field. You could plug country in. And you could plug either state or postal code in to the postal code field, right? And you could do this on a global scale, and it would actually probably still run relatively quickly. Right. So now we've got to determine. Remember if we flash back to like 10 slides ago, we have 3 reps. We're going to create 3 territories apiece. So we need to create 9 territories, and we want them to be equal based on this index number that we've just created. So we're just going to do a kind of a quick. We see we've got 32,820 points of index. And I can do my math right here. I don't even need to open up calculator. It means I've got a target index of 3,641 points per territory. So what I like to do, if you don't have a template, Justin's going to show you how you might make a nice dashboard with some template. So, and I usually like to go about plus or minus 5% for a target, because we're never going to be able to nail it like exactly 100%. But if we can get within just a few percentage points, like we're generally quite happy. So we'll just go ahead and say for this, we'll abstract a little bit, but we'll say maybe 3,500 to 3,800 is our ideal range. Right. And so now what we can do is we can go and we can choose somewhere maybe that's really dense. You'll notice that the clusters get much smaller as we get into areas where we have a lot of business activity. That's because that clustering algorithm has detected that, hey, like if I make a really big cluster here, this is going to be way bigger than the territory that you want. And we tell it that we tell the cluster algorithm how many territories we want to create, right? So if you want really small clusters, just tell you're going to create like some crazy amount of territories, and it'll make them really small. So we can go in here and we can just start looking at our New York postal codes, and you can see down here in the bottom right, unfortunately it's very small on the presentation side. We see here what our sum of our index is. I would really love a feature where I could make that number bigger. It would help streamline my life as we do these. To give you context, we create, in a given planning cycle, we create around 400 of these between all of our different segments. So this is an at-scale activity. And I built a tool a while ago that tried to do this in an automated fashion, and it actually ended up taking longer than just having a person who knew what they were doing do it by hand. And the other advantage of doing this by hand rather than in an automated fashion, other than the fact that it still actually saves you some time, is that a lot of the times, like our manager that Justin mentioned, people have a lot of very strong opinions about exactly where they want to put their geographic boundaries for certain sales territories, right? It's like this guy in question, he would like to be able to divide Manhattan in a very particular way. So this gives us the flexibility of, okay, we can still divide Manhattan along these boundaries, roughly north-south. If we want to, we can actually go down and we can go down to the postal code level and do this for certain individual postal codes, and then we can go back up to the cluster level for everybody else and do the rest of the clusters, right? So we get a lot of flexibility in being able to provide extreme customization for people who have really strong feelings about it, but for a lot of other areas, right, we don't necessarily need to hand allocate every single postal code in like Kansas and Nebraska. No offense to Kansas and Nebraska, but there's just no need to have that level of detail over areas where it's mostly going to be fields, right, unless you're in the agricultural business. Yes?
So just as you were saying, a manager has really strong feelings about New York, how would they send that response back saying they want this zip code in this territory based on the other? They have to send that data back to you and you have to redraw, or how does that feedback loop go?
Usually we scope it before we do this. So we might get feedback that, hey, like, yeah, Silicon Valley is one that's always a huge one for us, right? People have extreme feelings about which part of the Bay everybody's going to own. So we scope that ahead of time, and we know. So we may actually, there's a couple things that we would do depending on how exact the request is. We might pull out those postal codes and say, we're just not even going to cluster them, right? And then we'll kind of create sort of a separate path in prep, and then we'll union them back together. We'll take every single individual postal code in the Bay, and then we'll cluster like all the rest of the West Coast. And so we'll hand allocate those ones, and then and we can do this simultaneously, right? So we don't show this in this data set, but in that clustering tool, if a postal code is too big, it doesn't cluster it. It just kicks it out, and its cluster is the same as its postal code number. So it still retains a unique ID. You can intermingle them as you need.
Also, too, at this, you're going to have the underlining, right? You're going to get every postal code. So if you decide that you want to override a boundary or something, you have that flexibility. The other thing, too, the idea with this is that, as Hunter, as we're showing this on stage, right, we're doing this presentation under an hour. You should be able to get in a meeting room or have a virtual, if you have the ability to share your screen, you can do this on the fly. And if it's like, hey, it's taking too much time, just give me 20 minutes, I'll send it back to you, right? Like that's the idea of how to be more collaborative and make them a part of the process. That was kind of where I was going with the engaged stakeholders, is how do you get them involved? Because when they buy into their plans, we actually see teams and reps actually as weird as it sounds, but be more productive as they go and sell because they actually felt that they had some ownership into how the territories were created.
Yeah, the ownership piece is huge, right? Because it really takes away the piece of we were kind of just handed this thing and we don't like it. It's like, no, I mean, we worked on this together, right? And this is something that I feel like really gives us a great ability to take that feedback and do meaningful actions based on it, right? So now I'm just kind of freehanding this here because we're playing out a scenario where we're just being told, hey, like give us 9 territories, right? But the reality of it is that I might have instructed, like, we need to do 38 territories, and here's how I want to divide Metro Atlanta, and for the rest of it, just kind of do your thing, right? That I would say that would be a very typical type of request.
And also, too, you can bake this into your timeline, right? Like, what is your first iteration review? Have another week, right, where they can digest information, do another one, and then that way it's like, I mean, it's a waterfall approach. It's not as agile as some people would want, but at the same time, it's a repetitive, gives the people to be a part, and also, too, is it's baked into your plan, right? Like, as I was going through those stages, that's where it enables you as a team to know, like, hey, we've hit this deadline. We're, like, moving forward. We got to start assigning territories because it's November 24th, and we got to get the sales force, like for us, we have over, I mean, just raw accounts, over 275,000 accounts that we got to assign globally. So.
Do you guys do new territories every year? What is it like, and how often do you guys do this?
Yeah, so I guess he asked, do you guys do territories every year? The answer is yes. At the same time, we try to keep continuity, right? Like, we're not trying to disturb. I mean, when I first came in, we were growing like crazy. I mean, it was literally 40, 35% year over year, and so just inevitably, right, there's a number, and it's the denominator's getting smaller, the number's getting smaller and smaller for a number of accounts and stuff. But as we've grown, this is part of how we try to keep continuity. Also, too, is getting back to segmentation and rules, is as you look to add, okay, I want these SIC codes to go to this industry or to this, these SIC codes with under this amount of threshold, like building that into your rule engine. If you guys try to scale, you want a rule engine, right? You want some way that's going to say this account belongs in this segment, that segment then belongs, and then you can figure out, okay, here's how big our segmentation is. So, but yeah, one of the metrics that we actually track from year over year is actually like how many of our customers are changing sales reps' hands. And there's a couple of factors, right, like attrition and people leaving, but at the same time, if we can be more continuity, it's better for all of you guys. You establish relationships, you know who to talk to, you know how to get things through. So.
Yeah, no one wants to have a different rep every 6 months, right? Because they're either getting promoted or, you're going to end up with one every planning cycle in that old scenario, right? Suboptimal outcome for everybody, right? Because every rep has to then get to know basically every single one of their customers, again, every year, which we don't want that. That's not good, right? So yeah.
Tableau, like to dynamically put those territories in there? It seems like a very interactive process where you're trying to take away from some other territories to just create this new boundary. We've run into those challenges using Tableau.
Yeah. So the question was, if you have a situation where your management wants to add a bunch of people, do we just sort of start peeling off from existing territories, or I think the alternative would be we just kind of scrap everything and we start again from scratch. Is that correct?
They never want to do the from scratch.
Yeah.
So the difficulties.
Yeah. So that's one where we have a scenario. One of the reasons we actually create 4 or 5 territories per sales rep. Is in this example, just for time, you guys don't want to watch me create that many territories. I don't think it probably feels too much like you're at work instead of at a conference. But the piece of it is that gives us some ability to say, okay, well, we could probably add, if we had to, up to 2 or 3 more people in this district without having to do, like there is a line, right, where it's like if I've added so many people, like in this scenario, we've got 3 people in 9 territories, I can probably only increase by maybe 50 or 60% my sales force in a year before I would have to go back and do like a total redraw. So having an understanding of what your growth expectations are to begin the year would be a huge piece of that. But For us, we've generally been able to do it. We had one scenario where we did have to do kind of a big chop, and what we did was we actually took the existing territories and we cut them like in half again in certain regions, and then reallocated the halves as well, right? But it at least allowed us to keep as much continuity as we kind of possibly could. But there's, I mean, stuff happens as well, but we try our absolute best to not do the blow up and go again piece, just because of the amount of disruption.
Yeah, it's like initially when we first started creating these in the original software, it's like, okay, let's just create 2 per head, right? It's a lot easier. The software failed a lot. Like it just was tedious. Whereas with this, we can go through this process and people actually understand it. I mean, I love puzzles and games. And so for me, it's like, this is a puzzle piece. And also too, right, the managers are buying into this methodology that when you're applying this, they understand like, okay, my boss told me I'm gonna have to hire 3 people. I got 4 in seats, so I'm gonna have 7 people at the end of the year. I'm gonna have like 4 territories I'm gonna have 28 territories. That gives them some flexibility of, okay, working with the 4 people that are in seat, here we're gonna do these territories. These are your 2 primary ones, like, right, I want to see 85% of your business come from this in the next 6 months. Where the other ones you can start peeling back. And also too, right, like, this is where it gets a little technical, but with like the quota plans, if they're going to be hired in Q3, Q4, and they're not going to be ramping and they're not going to have quotas and that stuff, that gives you a little flexibility. So as you get ready for the next year, it's like, okay, where do we see that we're going to start cutting stuff up? And what that enables is more conversation around what's about to change and being proactive with that. Because I think the biggest piece is you don't want to just take things away from people. You want people to feel that there's a reason why. And it's explaining, hey, John, like you did really well this year. Like, yeah, we're downsizing, but we also see a lot more potential. We're going to put this account-based marketing plan in place for your big customers because we see that you can actually grow them by more than you have in the past. So I guess to summarize, the puzzle pieces is really what's enabled us to scale outwards, because instead of having to reassign all those accounts, the leads, the opportunities, we've worked with our business development team in Salesforce. We can just add someone into our territory assignments, click a button, and all the stuff transfers through. And then that way, as new hires come on, as people leave, it's just more of not a button clicking, but it's more of just getting people in and getting people out of their roles and in the territories.
Yeah, so while we were doing all that, we finished creating our 9 territories. We grouped them upwards by the group we created in the clusters, so now we can see them on the map. We can just kind of keep something like this as a little bit of a tracker. We can see we're a little overweight in the Arizona, Alaska area. And there are times when we actually, as part of our strategy, we overweight or underweight areas just because we know that either one's going to be like a lot more work and you're just going to need more time to handle it, or yeah, there's a lot of customers there, but we know, even though we can't necessarily always programmatically represent it in the data, we just know that historically it's always been a little bit of a lower potential area. So transactional might be good, but your big deal potential is just a little bit less, right? And there's ways you could try to represent that programmatically, or you could kind of take some of your insider knowledge and just sort of translate that a little bit as well, right? And so Justin's going to show us how you might turn that into more of a full-featured dashboard, right? So one of the big advantages of having this in Tableau is that my data's already there. It's like, boom, now I'm ready to make a dashboard. I don't have to dump it out, export it, do some other kind of cleaning thing. Like, we're ready to go. We're ready to make a dashboard and just put it out there.
So this is kind of this is a final product, so to speak, and what you'd bring. But the idea here is that we can create some dynamic parameters in the top left that are, what are the number of territories, what are the number of direct headcount, what is our threshold that we see of index. So if I, for example, want to change it to, we're a little lenient, we're going to go to 10%, you can see that in the graph, the bottom chart, or the Southern California, right now, the red means that it's undervalued just by 180 index points. But if we change that threshold dynamically, 10%, it meets the threshold, right? It's within that boundary. And so you can see also within these charts that these values will update. But if you imagine that, as Hunter showed when he was creating those postal codes, if you had this template's going to be there, you guys can download it. You can put it in, you can get your data in that way, but as Hunter was creating these things, you could dynamically be zooming into these and seeing what the charts would be looking like. What is it, like how do my number of sales in the last 24 months be able to highlight through, and being able to drill down into the territories themselves to see kind of what is the output, be able to get a viz within a biz, right? What is the actual number of customers, the transactions. And as you're working with your sales leaders, right, this is where you can get to that granularity, but also, okay, well, we're gonna blow up the Northeast, right? Okay, well, one click, and I can say, well, let's ungroup this. It's gonna take us some time. Right now, it's gonna blow this out, but now you can go back and see, a little bit of formatting here, but you can see where we would wanna restitch in the Northeast. So just to go back to keep it looking clean. Again, this data, or this dashboard's here, it's ready for you guys. In theory, all you have to do is run your data through it as you create the workflows and score the postal code. So, yeah, we got, how much time do we have left?
About 10 minutes.
Cool, so we got about 10 minutes left. We'll do a little last slide.
Yeah, we got a couple things here. So let's do some quick takeaways, right? Build territories faster, cheaper, and better with Tableau. I mean, I just built 9 territories in 15, 20 minutes. So even if you have a list of, very precise instructions, I'm pretty confident you guys can do it under a couple hours. Right? Ensure your group's aligned and engaged before beginning territory creation, right? Our best practices, make sure you're following your best practices. Otherwise, you're gonna end up creating these same territories over and over and over and over again as people bring up a lot of stuff that they feel like wasn't covered early in the planning process. So once the segment's large enough that we can't do it at the state level anymore, like California is always the first one for us that we can't do it at the state level, and we have to start splitting it up. Rather than having to go all the way down to postal codes, we can use this intermediate optimization piece with the clusters to make that happen. And the piece that lets us enable that is using the custom and geography from a field, right? Super valuable field in Tableau, not just for territory creation, but for any type of kind of composite territory view that you might want to create, districts, regions, subregions. Right. So you're going to want to take a picture of this if you want to download the stuff. This is my GitHub. It's on our TC18 Sales Ops folder. You do need to have R installed. I like RStudio. You don't have to have RStudio. You can use just regular R if you're so inclined and just run it right from the command line. RStudio I prefer, but there's other R IDs out there. I'm not trying to be an RStudio evangelist. Yeah, so let's do a little bit of Q&A. I think we got about 8-10 minutes left. Oh yeah, sure thing. Yeah, we can leave it up during Q&A. Mm-hmm. Yes?
How do you deal, you said you have approximately 270,000 accounts globally.
Yep.
How do you deal with account duplication? Like, 100 AT&T, those types of things.
We have one person who that's basically their entire job. So.
Well, we have a.
I mean, not to overly simplify, but I mean, it takes work. Like, you have to invest in your data. If you don't invest in your data,
I mean, some of it
we can't help you.
Yeah, this is really the territory creation, right? Like, but some of it is master data management, having a data steward or data stewards if you're able to convince your organization. But really, it's getting back to those key definitions. Like, that's part of their ignition, or part of their roles and responsibilities is to govern that, and also to if you guys use Salesforce, like put validation rules in, like do some A/B testing. If we got a lot of kickback that we don't want to slow accounts down from being created, we want deals to come in. It's at the same time we want good data. So it's how do you show hey, a validation rule is not really going to hiccup this process. So validation rules are huge for data governance. I can talk all day about this kind of stuff. But
the question was, I forgot because of the recording. The question was, you've got a whole bunch of accounts. How do you ensure that duplicate accounts and other account data quality problems aren't creating issues within these models, right?
There's a bunch of vendors out there too that do deduplication. So not that we have one particular that we can recommend, but there are, if you're able to get some budget improved, there's stuff too. But also too is the process, right? How do you get accounts created in Salesforce? If you don't know that answer, that's a valuable thing to go through, and then that way you know, okay, who's creating them, when are they creating them, what are some validation fields that we want to make sure that we're having to apply these segmentation rules, and that we have valid data, right? And also too is what are some of if you can work with your DBA team or in Tableau Prep, it actually will do a lot, how do you clean up some of this stuff that's just common errors in the intermediate time until you actually apply these validation rules in place.
Yeah. In front row. For a second.
Resources for, studying more about this topic, because I know, a lot of people might not use Geographic for maybe local account,
Yeah.
kind of segment those accounts.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a source that you recommend
So the question was, if we have any additional kind of materials or sources that we could recommend to kind of learn more about this topic or different ways that you might attack it. I don't have one off the top of my head. I bet Justin does. I will say we also do segmentation based on like Global 1000 or like top public sector budgets, and we use that stuff as well. And that will be used more for our sales segments where we have defined account lists, and we have territory is typically a little bit more of a catch-all bucket. So a lot of net new leads that aren't attributed to one of those accounts. So it's kind of a multi-layer segmentation piece. Justin, do you have any resources that people might be interested in?
There's some, I'll see if I can figure it out and put on I can't remember where the link is, but there's an academic research about like territory construction, and it really gets into like the theory behind why we have, in the United States at least, why would we have a judicial branch, right? Like there's rules and regulations that apply so people understand. And when people actually have those, it's easier to do their job. And know what they can and can't do. So there's a lot of theories behind that. My other suggestion is that when you're saying account list, right? Like, I think this is our first year of actually having a centralized, like cloud-based account planning module as well. So this is all territory-based, and we have an engine that runs. And when I say engine, right, it's like a JavaScript that takes rules and applies these rules that creates these segmentations. So we use that as a source of truth. And if you guys are big enough and you have some resources, like if you don't do this already, I would snapshot your account data so that you know, like, we're routing accounts as of this date. What that enables is that when you get their accounts when the reps get those accounts in their names, you know it's because of the data that was snapshot as a point in time. We ran into an issue as we scaled upwards that the data was being updated live so that it's always accurate and it's the truth, and we have reliable measures for doing how big an account is, total addressable market. But taking that snapshot, it enables you to say, like, these are where the accounts are going to go. Salespeople feel confident that you get your accounts and you work those accounts. So.
All right. On the front here, or fourth row?
So in this data set that you shared, and based on the best practices in the industry, do you map zip codes to accounts based on the headquarters, where zip codes of the headquarters where the account is
Got it.
located?
Yeah, so the question is, stop me if I get it wrong. We're mapping by postal codes. Do we map, does the postal code that we use, is that for the company headquarters, or how do we basically define what the postal code is for that company or account? So for us, generally, it would be the company headquarters or billing address. Depending, this would be another piece where data steward comes in a little bit. There's a few nuances in there, right? But when I was in shipping and logistics, right, we had one company could have 600 accounts because that's every single warehouse that we've ever shipped to on their behalf. But we would delineate within our CRM, is this a billing location? Is it a credit location? Or is it just a receivership location? And so for us, we cared about the billing and the credit locations, and the receivership locations was maybe more for our kind of support or customer success piece, but not for our sales piece.
I'll just add too real quick that the data stewardship, it's the offensive line of a football team, right? It's the piece that you just have no idea what's going on, but it's crucial to be in a data-driven culture. Like the more you just read from sales ops execs and stuff, they talk about all these theoretical things. If you don't have the data underlining to do these things internally, it's just really challenging. But yeah, to your point, like there's some hack stuff that you can do in prep and stuff to normalize this data to at least get what you want. But over time, my best practice would be as you implement it in your CRMs for how do you create accounts, like getting through that project. We're going through that as a company because we're still so young, and it's painful, but it's also, what it's enabled us is when we work with marketing and we work with the customer success and when we work with the dev team, like we have this data and they're like, holy crap, like this is really good, it's really accurate. And also too is when we have contractors and vendors come in, they're like, you guys got a good start, just got to keep on, like don't forget about it. It's not a one-time do and then it'll do its thing. You just have to keep on, have measure points of when the data quality is really good and really bad, right? And how do you have those thresholds? What are the data points that your organization cares about?
Yeah, shout out to Dean Carter. He's awesome. If you see him, give him a massive high five. He's our customer data steward. In the middle, yeah.
You guys had to contend at all in geographic mapping with customer-specific overrides. So if you have zip code X that's assigned to territory A, having a specific customer aligned to a different territory in that zip code.
Okay. So the question is if we've had to contend with certain kind of corner case or override situations where we've got one customer and the postal code we have for them isn't reflective of where we actually want their territory to be. The answer is yes. We have had that. They're relatively rare. Often, and Justin could probably interject in here, something like that would arise where they've got a location where they're maybe doing a lot of their accounting, like in a Nevada or Texas or another kind of tax-free state, but they're actually running all their business operations out of a different state. And so we have the concept of a territory postal code, which allows us to kind of basically override and then lock that postal code, and it eliminates the number of people who can change that postal code. They can go ahead and change a billing postal code in CRM if necessary, but they have to talk to us if they want to change the territory postal code. Yes, in the back.
So our sales code are physically in territories.
Yep.
So we use like handicap systems to take demographic data, zip code, land mass, things like that, to try to equalize the territories. Because obviously a territory in Manhattan can have, for us, 4,000 or 5,000 customers, whereas our territories out in South Dakota, because they're so far.
Yep.
The physicality we can't get away from. Do you guys have any experience in level setting the territories based upon the actual physical attributes of the zip codes?
So the question is if we had any level setting or experience kind of handicapping territories based on physical attributes of the postal codes. I may need to dive a little bit deeper into that question to understand exactly what you're asking.
Yeah, our wholesalers actually live in the territory.
Yeah, correct. So they're kind of a field seller, right? They live within the territory.
Can't get past the fact that they got to drive from
Correct.
point A to point B. It's not just about the sales. It's
Correct.
about how they can cover those sales.
Yes. So we've used for that type of model, right, with a field seller, we do not use this territory creation model. We use a different one, and where we use what I would consider, you would call it a supply and demand model, where we basically calculate the distance from the postal code to that seller's home office location, and then we essentially iterate outwards until they've received enough accounts to have an equitably balanced territory, right? So you would see your guy in Manhattan would have a territory that would be like yay big, and then your guy in South Dakota would probably end up owning like everything from Idaho to Minneapolis. But yeah, this model does not fit as well for a field seller. You could do it, but you would basically have to start. You would want to I think a little feedback here, so I'll move to the front. You would want to overlay their location on the map and be very conscious about being radially outward from that location, right? So you would need to modify your process a little bit if you wanted to use this particular one. We use kind of a more like operations research type of package for optimization based on the field seller model. Yeah.
For someone who has virtually zero experience territory planning and would like to roll this out or explore rolling it out to the organization, what advice can you give specifically around that early scoping phase and those conversations with the sales leaders to prevent some of the rework later on the road?
Okay, so the question was if you've not really done this before, or you're lightly experienced in this, do we have any kind of pointers or suggestions about what we could do up front before we actually start constructing these territories to make this a useful and valuable process? I think Justin will probably have a lot to say on that subject.
My thing is, like, you have a current set of sales team, right? Like, I would start there. That would be my first. Who are the players? Like, who reports to who? What are like, how do you get all the way up your chain? Like, build out that hierarchy map for yourself so that you understand it. And then I would then say, okay, well, let's actually look at our account base and how much of, like, what have we done in a business? Is it realistic that we grow, and where do we pick those growth others? Going back to the kind of blueprint, right? Like, that's building your resource or your tops-down model. And then that's something that you guys will anchor off of, like, okay, we're going to have 3 people that are reporting here, or we're going to promote this person to a different role. I'll say it depends on your quota model, too, that you have in terms of your sellers, like how much flexibility you can change across. And for us, being a publicly traded company, it's very important that how we set quotas and do forecasting and stuff is very systematic. But if you have a little more flexibility, right, like it's just making sure that you're aware of the rosters, and then what is the future roster going to look like, putting in those forecast positions, planning ahead, so that as you're building these territories out, it's like, well, I only have 4 people, I only care about like 4 territories. It's like, well, no, remember we're going to hire 3 more people we want to be ready moving ahead, and then just making that transparent to them. The next thing I'd do is like your boundaries. So if you're going to grow your business, have the geographic boundaries. Start looking at, okay, well, what's fair between the east versus the central versus the west, or the east versus west, and how do you draw those lines so people understand that as you then work your way down. And this process becomes a lot easier, actually, because you're like, okay, I'm just going to focus on the northwest states, and I'm going to build the 5 territories for them. Okay, I'm going to ship that off, or I'm going to work with that leader to develop that. So.
Yeah, I would, to add to that 100% all true. In addition, being able to kind of have some sort of agreed upon scoring mechanism or balancing mechanism is going to be very valuable, because you're going to be able to, we balance not just at the territory level, right? Like I gave you all like a little more simplified demo just for sake of time, but we do this to basically validate our sub-regional boundaries and our district boundaries as well, right? So we're calculating kind of our index per head count at the sub-region level, at the district level, as we go, to make sure that, not just that everything is balanced within sub-region, but we also want territories within the east sub-region to be roughly equal to territories in the west sub-region. Now, we can't always get, everybody will, at some point, everybody will cry inequality, if one's got like 1.5% less, right? But you get it to as close as you can to where adding or subtracting a position would tilt it the other way. And that's kind of the best you can do. But if you start out pretty balanced, it gives you a lot better options going forward.
Yeah, I just want to be conscious that we are past the half hour, but we're willing to stay. We don't have anything after this. I don't know if we have any people in the room, but yeah, if you do, got to move. But yeah, if we can keep.
Yeah, I don't want to keep anybody from missing their next session, but we're happy to stay and answer questions too.
Thank you.